Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Debatable Discussions podcast. Today we are going to be talking about a very interesting topic in the realm of sort of philosophy, and that is the concept and the feeling of nostalgia and other emotions related to human consciousness.
Yes. So as you described there, Diane, today we'll be doing a deep dive into ideas amongst the human consciousness, but mainly experience. So nostalgia and how we treat experience and the past as a philosophical idea. So Diane, you've got your own theory for nostalgia. So can you please start the episode and state what is nostalgia for you?
Well, to me, nostalgia is a inherently fake emotion. It's an incredibly false emotion, a deceitful emotion. I don't think you can ever feel nostalgic for something that was. I think you feel nostalgic for something that didn't exist, but you think it existed. And there's a couple of examples of this. So there's a great book. It's called the Homo Irrealistus, something like that, and it explains in the introduction how the author felt nostalgic for the feeling of leaving Egypt.
Oh,
So he didn't
yeah.
feel nostalgic for the Egypt that was then, or the Egypt that was when he was writing. He felt nostalgic for when he was 18 and looking towards life in Paris, which he never even experienced. So it's other things such as people in Russia now being really nostalgic about the USSR, even people who didn't experience it, and
Yeah.
everyone's sort of painting in this really positive picture. Now we saw a new study around 40% of Spanish people are really nostalgic about Franco's dictatorship, and they're not remembering, they're not nostalgic about the realities of it, but about this sort of deceitful image that they've got in their minds about that time.
Yes, I think nostalgia is a present emotion. Um, it's it's a way of understanding the world through actions, and they're not my words; they are the words of Martin Heidegger, a 20th century philosopher who viewed nostalgia as being this sort of reflective quality, as you're describing there, Diane, which is sort of embodied in our experience of the world. And I think it's a very interesting thing, nostalgia, to be nostalgic about something. Primarily because, as you described there, nostalgia, especially about the past, it includes this idea of glamorizing it
Yeah.
or fantasizing it in a way that makes it seem better than it was, to make it seem like almost a comfort to present day troubles. Typically, the case is, you gave the example there of Soviet Union, or Franco in Spain, or even things like the British Empire. Britain was, there were worse living standards under the empire. Commonly, ideas about morality then were very different to those today, and therefore, in that sense, it's ridiculous for people to be nostalgic about an empire, because it's Obama this, but I think it was Barack Obama who said, "The world we live in today is the best possible world." In the sense that science and all these other things have developed to take us to where we are in the world today. And so that applies with nostalgia. It's this idea of trying to seek comfort in the past, where perhaps there isn't really that much comfort to be sought.
Well, yeah, definitely. I think, looking back to that example of Franco in Spain, I mean, Franco, a dictator, a butcher, killed hundreds of thousands of
Yeah.
people, or had people kill and torture hundreds of thousands of people, mass graves, and just a lot of suppression of human and basic rights.
Yeah.
And people feel nostalgic about it, but I don't think it's the memories. It is this sort of glamorization that you've mentioned, but it's also, I think, other factors. So, for example, people feel nostalgic about the past because they were younger and they were, And right now, if you are sort of on the older side, maybe you've got some mobility issues, and you've had your life, you've had your best moments, and your best moments did happen during a really nasty time. You still remember that time as a lot better because you you went out with your friends and you had this sort of adventure almost of life. And it's really easy to fall into the trap of just associating those really positive feelings of your youth with really a time of depression, really,
Yeah.
I'd say.
Yes, and I agree there. And I will decant another philosophical opinion in a second. But a quick message to our listeners. Can you do please subscribe or follow us if you are listening, and do listen on to the end. Similarly, check us out on all social media platforms. And after listening to this, do listen to a past episode. But as you described there, Diane, I think a key idea about nostalgia is this idea of present consciousness. And this is an idea which has been articulated by Edmund Husserl. I may get the pronunciation wrong there, but he was an Austrian-German philosopher in the 19th and 20th century. And he viewed nostalgia as a retentional act in which consciousness intends the past as still being meaningful now. So it's very similar to as you described there. And that it's not the past that we're feeling, it's a present consciousness of a past experience. It's trying to create the past in the present. And I think we've got a habit of doing this, perhaps, as humans. Do we try and intuitively find comfort in something, or appeal our minds? Do they try and appeal to something that seems more comforting than the world we're in because we perhaps get used to it, or dramatize the world that we live in? And I think
Yeah,
perhaps we do.
yeah, I think you're right there. I think a great example of it, although fictional, is in Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera, where the sort of protagonist is falls in love with this girl, and then for the whole of his life he looks back on that time very nostalgically, even if he wasn't in the best physical form. He was quite unhealthy, really had some health issues. His eyesight was quite poor. He didn't have any resources, but he worked long hours. But he looks back on that time as if it was, the best time of his life. And it might have been, but again, there is that element, John, as you've mentioned before, of looking at it as from a comfort perspective. You look at the past, even if it wasn't that great, and you imagine yourselves in being in this really amazing relationship, and this really amazing position, this really amazing life that you had, when in fact you didn't, and you're just trying to mask the issues of your life now.
Diane, all of these sorts of thoughts we've had around nostalgia, they're all orientated towards, as we addressed at the start of the episode, this wider idea of the human experience and consciousness. So perhaps we can just touch on that quickly. What do you think is consciousness? It's an idea that's been, I think, debated back and forth by philosophers over centuries. But what is consciousness for you?
Well, I'm gonna quote Yuval Noah Harari on this. I think it's the ability to feel emotions. I think, again, echoing Harari again, it is very different from problem solving. Problem solving is the ability to solve a problem. It's to get a solution, find an answer. So AI
Yeah.
is very good at problem solving, but AI doesn't feel an emotion.
Yeah.
So if you're playing chess against an AI, it can play chess, it can problem solve, but it doesn't feel sad if it loses or happy if it wins.
Yeah.
I think that's the sort of defining factor. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I like that emotion. I don't really have a preconceived idea of consciousness, but it would be something similar to being on those lines, primarily because I believe that animals aren't fully conscious, or if they are conscious, it's not to the level of sophistication that humans have. And I think that's because perhaps we have a more, and this isn't scientific, Dan, you may know more than, you will know more than me about this, but I don't think they're as sophisticated, perhaps, emotional beings, or from an intelligence perspective, in the sense that humans, our interactions with one another have developed to a far higher extent. I mean, to develop to using things like technology, for example.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think there almost needs to be a way of, and I think your definition did this, of separating the consciousness that our plants may feel which obviously cannot feel emotions, to that which a rat may feel, to that which a human may
Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you've actually touched on a great point there, which is that although humanity sort of objectively, one might argue it's the most
Yeah.
intelligent species, one could also argue we are the
Yeah.
most stupid species at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at what we're doing, I mean, like, what's the point? You know, you look at what we're doing, and we are genuinely, we are destroying the planet.
Yeah.
Full stop. No question. No question. We have this really almost human instinct, almost this second nature of wanting power and doing anything to get it, even if it means that we are actively hurting and damaging other people. It's it's the opposite of what an intelligent life form would be,
Yeah.
if you think about it. But at the same time, we live in this paradox of humanity being incredibly clever, but also incredibly stupid at the same time.
And perhaps it's even more cyclical than that, because we find ourselves doing environmental harm, but is it perhaps so we can achieve this highly sophisticated and perhaps in many parts of the world luxurious life that we have? In the West, we find ourselves simply having to destroy fossil fuels, and it's now seen as, it's basically just an inevitable reality of maintaining the world or the society in which a country like the United Kingdom functions. It would be very difficult from an economic perspective to not destroy the environment in the sense of fossil fuels. But going back to consciousness, Diane, there are two theories and that often get thrown around within this idea of consciousness, and that's dualism and materialism. For our listeners who don't know, can you touch on what these two perhaps landmark opposing philosophical theories are?
Well, materialism, coming from the sort of material, is that there's no separation. Whilst dualism actually does literally mean the separation between the body and the mind. There's two separate entities, and the mind slash soul. There's a very fine distinction there, but the mind and the body being two separate entities, and that it's not all governed by atoms and reactions and hormones in your brain. Materialists do think that. Materialists have this sort of desire, almost this obsession with proof.
Okay.
And because they can't find proof for many of the dualist perspectives, God, there's no proof. They do go into this very hardline materialist view of we are just atoms arranged in a certain way, and all our emotions and all our feelings are the result of chemical reactions in our brains and things colliding and enzymes working properly. And we're not actually the product of a sophisticated, separate entity, as in our mind, that enables us to feel these emotions.
So would you say you're more of a dualist then?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I think materialism is frankly a sad theory.
Yeah.
It's a very pessimistic outlook, and it does ignore the miraculousness of the human perspective.
Yeah. Yes.
Again, I've said humanity is very stupid, but at the same time, we're incredibly intelligent.
Yeah.
The fact that we've managed to evolve the way we have evolved, maintaining ourselves at the top of the food chain, but also involving ourselves with the arts, with culture, with high culture, novels, books, and also keeping things like this. I mean, this is a epic poem written in the sort of 1400s, and it's still kept today. And that to me does give something that cannot be explained purely by chemical reactions and atoms. There's something more.
Yes, I don't know where I personally fall on this, and I appreciate the arguments of both sides. There's inherently, I feel like I may be more of a materialist, but only elements of materialism though, because I do think that fundamentally everything we believe can perhaps be traced back to something material in the sense of it can be proven scientifically, but that's purely restricted, I believe, to the brain. You can look at chemical imbalances. But then even there's a limit of what you can discover. Obviously, we're not at such a sophisticated level in which a computer can detect human thought. That isn't possible.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I think, it's a very tough question and one that has been debated and will continue to be debated forever, really. I don't think there's much, because both sides are in this very weird dilemma of materialists wanting evidence, hard evidence,
Yeah.
and dualists almost saying that, not all obviously, but almost saying that, there's some things beyond evidence, and that is this concept of the mind and of the soul. So there is no evidence.
Yeah.
So, both sides have diverged by this evidence dilemma, and one saying we really want it, and the other saying, well, it doesn't exist. The concept that we're looking at doesn't have any evidence for it, but it just is. Because there's no evidence against it. So I think that's the sort of main dilemma people face when deciding where they're at.
Yes, that is very interesting. Diane, as a final question, and to reflect upon any philosophical episode or any philosophical discussion, it always ends in free will, it seems. It's an idea that philosophers love. So perhaps can you touch upon how does consciousness relate to free will, in your opinion? They're two landmark debates, but is there a relation between the two?
Yes, well, free will and consciousness are obviously interlinked. You can't have free will unless you are conscious to be able to make your own decisions. But there's also another level, I think at least, to this whole debate, and it's what level of free will, how much free will do you need to have in order to have to be conscious?
Okay.
Because some people would claim that there's no free will. We're all, again, it's a predeterministic path that we're walking, and whilst we have this illusion of free will, it doesn't actually exist. And in that case, why would you need consciousness if everything else is already decided for you? So I do think the two ideas are very much sort of connected.
Yes, I think they are connected, and that it almost depends on the relationship is fundamentally about the level of consciousness we have and how that influences our free will. A fully conscious being should have more free will, one who's in more control of their thoughts. But are we fully conscious? And to finish off, it's sort of related to this idea of the simulation hypothesis. And this is this idea that we are almost in a computer game or simulation, and that we believe we're conscious, but do we actually have free will? Are our consciousness believed to have free will? Believe that we have free will, but we do not actually. Sort of tautology, almost trying to explain it. And it's a hypothesis that is quite hard to get your head around in a way. The simulation hypothesis, because would we truly ever know? It's something supported by Elon Musk, which does not at all help credit the theory. But there is an aspect to it in the sense that you never know. But if we do, so what? It doesn't affect the way we live.
Well, it might.
It might, but it doesn't affect the way that we understand the world, because I still know I can do this if I want. And as long as I believe that I'm happy in doing it and that it's my free choice, I'm fine.
I think it's a question of meaning, though.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, your actions, for most people, your actions have meaning. Unless you're a nihilist or sort of an extreme absurdist, your actions have meaning. But if we do live in a simulation, then why? Where is the meaning? Why does it matter? You wouldn't be sort of hung up on this idea of looking for meaning constantly.
Yeah. But yes, and sort of related to that, it wouldn't change the way I live my life in a way, because I still believe I'm living freely.
Yeah.
And so with that, we'll conclude the episode. We hope you've enjoyed listening. We've certainly had a very interesting discussion on aspects of nostalgia human experience and human consciousness.
Thank you, guys, and we will see you next week in another Debatable Discussions episode.
We'll see you then. Please do follow, subscribe, like, give us 5 stars, and anything else.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.